Good evening. My name is Sharon Bussey, and today I'd like to share with you a proposal for a training course entitled Scribble Sketch Storyboarding. As you're aware, my husband Steve and I are the co-directors of Salvation Factory. This is the innovation department for the Salvation Army in the USA Eastern Territory, and our role is to cultivate and promote a culture of innovation throughout our organization. To do this, we've recently been providing training on design thinking, which is a strategy that our officers and soldiers within the Salvation Army can use to come up with and then test and implement new ideas within our movement. And part of the strategy is to prototype and test ideas before implementing them. This is where the Scribble Sketch Storyboard can come into play. Because it is a paper prototype, it allows us to make a quick, cheap, and ugly visual representation of an idea in our head. By making that idea visible to others, we invite collaboration so that the idea can be iterated on and improved before a significant amount of money and time has been invested into it. And so here are some of the great advantages to teaching employees and members of the Salvation Army, particularly our pastors serving on the front lines, this skill. Because first of all, it allows us to quickly and efficiently test an idea before we invest in it. It invites collaboration, which always strengthens and makes an idea better. It facilitates divergent and convergent thinking, which allows for the end product or the end result to have greater transformational potential. And then Scribble Sketch Storyboarding also helps us to break big ideas and concepts into smaller ones, which is an incredible benefit when we get to the planning and implementation phase of an idea. In order to determine if Scribble Sketch Storyboarding was a viable training topic, I conducted a very quick survey of just a few people in the New York area. The total number of respondents were 9, and they responded to a survey that was hosted by SurveyMonkey. Feel free to check the link that's provided at the end of the segment of the presentation if you would like to review that survey in detail. But here's the results. First of all, the currently used techniques in place of Scribble Sketch Storyboarding is rated about 79% effective, and so we can see there's some room for us to improve. The majority had never used Scribble Sketch Storyboarding technique before, but they could see that this technique would be useful to them in their current role. In addition, most of them believed that this skill could be used on a weekly basis, which would be an incredible support and benefit to them in the various responsibilities that they hold. And then almost all of those surveyed expressed an interest in being able to learn this technique. This is great news because it says that our culture in the Salvation Army is open to learning and being able to implement Scribble Sketch Storyboarding and effective prototyping. There are 2 formats that this course could be presented in. The preferred format would be the online 8-week course. This will really unpack and ensure that the skill is able to be transferred. The second is the face-to-face, which is a condensed 3-hour workshop, and would be great if it was paired with the other design thinking training that is already happening around the territory. The training methods would be as is shown here on our slide: to tell through online lectures, to show through visual presentations, to invite through simulated experiences, to encourage and correct through the assessments, the interviews and the feedback, and then apply, being able to provide practical tools, and I'll show you some of these later on in the presentation, that would allow for the trainee to have an immediate real-world implementation and application. Our goal for this particular course is that those who participate will successfully be able to use the Scribble Sketch Storyboard technique to prototype and test new ideas rapidly and inexpensively. And those 2 criteria are very important to us because we want prototyping to happen quickly and we don't want it to cost a lot of money, so that new ideas can really be tested first as quickly as possible without that significant investment of time and money and personnel. Let's take a look at this 8-week course very quickly. First of all, we start off with design thinking. This is prerequisite knowledge and is going to help provide the context for the trainee to be able to understand where prototyping and then Scribble Sketch Storyboarding fit within this larger process. And so their objective here would be to be able to create a visual presentation that would be able to summarize the design thinking process. And here's an example of one that has already been developed using Powtoons. Week number 2, we would bring in that focus from design thinking to prototyping, and the students would be required to create an infographic that shares both the benefits and the characteristics of prototyping specifically. This is a technology required assessment, as is the one in week 1, and a tool that could be used to develop this would be something like Pictochart that would help them to be able to develop their infographic quickly. Here we are at week 3, and we're now focusing even further from design thinking prototyping right into a type of prototyping, and that would be Scribble sketch storyboarding. And here we're going to look at the ability of the student to be able to understand the process by completing an online test. Week 4, we're going to help them to begin to engage now with a simulated assessment. And this is part 1 of 4 parts of the simulated experience, where they will actually create the Scribble sketch storyboard and then test it. And so the first step is being able to organize all their thoughts and suggestions into one list. To be able to use that, we're going to be using the how might we question that would have been developed in the define phase of design thinking. How might we conduct a successful pastoral visit? And in order to do that, they're going to research the orders and regulations of the Salvation Army, find out what Salvation Army recommends happens, what is the process for this, and then they're going to add their own ideas to that. Once they have the list of actions that would be required in a successful pastoral visit, they will then, in week 5, work with the template that is being provided to them, created by Salvation Factory, to create the Scribble sketch storyboard and turn that list of actions into a visual representation. What's incredible about this, we already have an instructional video that's available online, so the student will be able to review that as many times as they need to make sure that they're able to implement the Scribble sketch storyboard for themselves. From week 5, we move into week 6, where we're now going to test the Scribble sketch storyboard. And in order to do that, students are going to be provided with this interview sheet. They will need to interview 6 people, 3 who represent their client and 3 who represent their consumer. And they'll need to be able to determine from them whether or not their suggested process is valid. They will gain feedback from them, and then in week 7 they will use that feedback to be able to iterate the next version of the Scribble sketch storyboard by removing post-it notes or moving post-it notes around in a different order, adding a new post-it note. They will be able to collate those new ideas received into their second iteration. Then in week 8, we're going to reflect on what we've learned about Scribble sketch storyboarding, about prototyping, about how we can connect with people. And so we're going to think about the build, measure, learn strategy that's outlined in prototyping, but we're going to think about that in terms of a personal reflective experience. And this will give the trainee an opportunity to really compare and contrast where they started 8 weeks ago and what they've learned throughout this journey and this process. We're then going to look at assessing the training course, and our particular focus here is to make sure that we're training the head, the heart, and the hands. And so when we think about training the heart, we think about affective learning. Did the student appreciate and see value in the training? Did they see value in the new skill? Did they connect to the trainer? And will they be able to use the skill in the future? Then we're going to think about, did we train the head? Did they learn what they needed to learn, and do they really understand the process and the context that has been taught to them? And so we're going to look at how each of the assessments that have been developed speaks to a cognitive learning assessment. So week 3 speaks to understand, week 1, 2, 4, and 7 focuses on the ability to analyze and synthesize, and then week 8 we think about the ability to be able to evaluate. And then we're going to ask ourselves, did we train the hands? Are they able to implement the behavior or the skill that we have tried to teach? And this is where we're going to think about the specific simulated experience that has been instructed through the Scribble sketch storyboard experience. And we're going to think about the atomistic? Did they do this in the correct order? The analytic, how well did they do it? And the holistic, what was the overall quality of that Scribble sketch storyboard? And we'll use a rubric to be able to determine the extent to which that performance task has been completed. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Our hope is that Scribble sketch storyboarding will be a technique that is going to help people in the Salvation Army in this USA Eastern Territory and around the world be able to effectively and efficiently prototype and test new ideas so that we can really ensure that our ministry and our service is having the effect that it should have for the glory of God and for the salvation of the world.